For our last week of Women's History Month, we're going to look at some of the more controversial women in Australian history. And there's probably nowhere else more to start than with the richest person in Australia, Gina Rinehart. Gina Rinehart is the only child of mining magnate Lang Hancock. When he died in 1992, she inherited his business, Hancock Prospecting, the largest private mining company in Australia. Under her stewardship, the Roy Hill mining project started shipments to Asia in 2015, escalating her net worth significantly. Rinehart has also made significant investments in rare earth minerals and the gas sector. She's also Australia's second largest cattle producer with a portfolio of properties across the country. She's currently worth around $29 billion, and that places her around 8th in the richest women in the world. Now, Gina Rinehart is a very complicated woman. She fell out with her late father after he married his Filipino housekeeper, Rose Porteous, a woman she very publicly despised. She spends a lot of her money on legal fees for several long-running legal battles over Hancock Prospecting, including with her 2 oldest children. They claim she defrauded them out of mining assets worth billions of dollars and left to them by their late grandfather. The legal dispute is still not resolved. She once told Australians that they need to cut labour costs in order to compete with Africans who are willing to work for less than $2 a day. I'm not sure what willing means in that scenario. But, and there's always a but in these situations, she's a very generous donor to the Australian Olympic team. She has ploughed up to $80 million into elite swimming, rowing, volleyball and artistic swimming since the 2012 Games in London, spending $50 million on swimming alone. Many of Australia's elite swimmers have publicly acknowledged that they could not have competed at the Paris Olympic without her support. These days, she considers herself a close and personal friend of that orange person in the US we won't be speaking about, and I expect she'll play a large role in the upcoming federal election. Brace yourselves. One of the quintessential sayings in Australian culture is, "A dingo's got my baby." Now, it seems like it's some kind of a joke, but really it represents the tragedy of Azaria Chamberlain and today's complicated woman of Australian history, her mother, Lindy Chamberlain. On a chilly night in August 1980, baby Azaria lay asleep in the family tent at the Uluru campsite as her parents chatted with other campers at the communal barbecue area. Around 8 p.m, campers heard the baby cry out and Lindy returned to check on her. That's when she saw a dingo leaving the tent with something in its mouth. She uttered her famous cry and quickly raised the alarm. Many campers reported seeing dingoes roaming the area and everybody believed her. Despite an extensive search by skilled Indigenous trackers of what is an extremely vast area, no trace of Azaria was immediately found. But 7 days later, a blood-stained item of her clothing was found near the base of Uluru. It supported the dingo theory. Azaria's death caused a media sensation, and I remember it, and I was only 6. Lindy came under immediate suspicion as there was no reported incidents of dingoes stealing babies. Well, that is, stealing white babies. Lindy kept herself calm and collected under intense pressure, and the media criticised her for not showing sufficient emotion. She became a household name for the worst of reasons. The first inquest into Azaria's death supported the dingo story, but intense pressure from people dissatisfied with this verdict forced a second inquest, and it recommended that Lindy be charged with murder and Azaria's father Michael as an accessory after the fact. Lindy's trial captivated the nation. There were even stalls selling souvenirs and t-shirts. A range of forensic experts gave evidence now considered flawed and incorrect. The other campers and the Indigenous trackers never wavered in their support for Lindy's story. But Lindy and Michael were convicted anyway. Appeals to overturn the conviction failed. Then in 1986, another item of Azaria's clothing was found, and it was sufficient to raise reasonable doubt and secure Lindy her release. In 2012, the final inquest into Azaria's death supported the first inquest. It found that Azaria was killed by a dingo. The Chamberlains divorced in 1991 and Michael died of cancer in 2017. Lindy now lives with her second husband in the United States. In our sports section for controversial women of Australian history, we have a woman who is not just the greatest Australian tennis player of all time, but one of the greatest in the world, Margaret Court. Raised in Albury, New South Wales, by 1960, at the age of 17, Margaret Smith, as she was known then, had won the first of 7 consecutive Australian Open singles titles. By 21, she had won all the Grand Slams. She played singles, doubles and mixed doubles, winning them all. She won 3 major singles titles after the birth of her first child in 1972, and she continued to play after 2 more children, only retiring in 1977. In total, she won 24 Grand Slam titles, a record no one has yet beaten. In 1987, the Victorian government built a multi-purpose sports and entertainment venue called Show Court 1. In 2003, it was renamed after Margaret Court and is now a major court in the Australian Open. Raised a Roman Catholic, Margaret Court became involved with Pentecostalism in the mid-1970s. After her retirement from tennis, she studied theology and in 1991 was ordained as an independent Pentecostal minister. She went on to found Margaret Court Ministries, based primarily out of Perth. As a minister, Margaret Court is not shy about criticising homosexuality and gender identity as against her God's teachings. She is an outspoken and consistent critic of same-sex marriage, campaigning against its legalisation in Australia. Over the years, noted former tennis players, including her fiercest on-court rival Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova and John McEnroe, have protested over the naming of Margaret Court Arena after her. You can say what you like about her views, but she doesn't care, and she's not about to change anytime soon. And so some way, you kind of have to admire that. Next in our week of Complicated Women for Women's History Month, we have a woman who was for a long time considered Australia's worst female serial killer, Kathleen Folbigg. In 2003, Kathleen was convicted of the murder of her 4 children over a 10-year period: Caleb, Patrick, Sarah and Laura. They were all under the age of 18 months, and Kathleen always denied killing them, claiming that they died of SIDS or natural causes. To secure her conviction, the prosecution used short excerpts of her diaries, especially the highly emotional and traumatic entries she made soon after her children's deaths. Also working against her was a theory called Meadows' Law. Devised by Sir Roy Meadows, it posits that more than 1 child's death in a family of SIDS is highly suspicious, and more than 3 means murder. Kathleen received a 40-year sentence, reduced to 25 years on appeal. Nothing much happened until 2011, when Emma Cunliffe published Murder, Medicine and Motherhood. She raised serious concerns about the fairness of Kathleen's trial. Thanks to the book, in 2013, the University of Newcastle Legal Centre announced it was seeking a judicial review of Kathleen's case. Large numbers of law students began painstakingly reviewing and combing through transcripts of wrongful conviction cases. By now, Meadows' Law had been firmly discredited as an explanation for multiple deaths in a family. The Legal Centre managed to get a judicial inquiry in 2019, but even though it considered new literature, it still found for Kathleen's guilt. No one could explain how Kathleen's children had died, if not by her own hand. After this inquiry, though, science finally began to catch up. It found that Kathleen's 2 daughters carried a gene capable of causing cardiac arrest and death. Further examination showed that Patrick likely died after an epileptic seizure. A second inquiry acknowledged reasonable doubt in Kathleen's case. On the 5th of June 2023, she received an unconditional pardon and walked free from prison. Last but not least for Women's History Month, we have one of the most influential Australian women in history, Germaine Greer. Born in Melbourne to a Catholic family, Germaine found school boring. But this did not stop her achieving the second highest results in the state her graduating year. She did not get along with her mother. And after she decided that the Catholic nuns at her school had not really proven any existence of God, she left the Catholic religion. She left home at 18 and moved to Sydney. Then she followed a conga line of Australian intellectuals to 1960s London. In her seminal work, The Female Eunuch in 1970, Greer argued that the roles of wife and mother in the traditional nuclear family subordinated and oppressed women. Greer believed men required women to fulfil a standard of femininity that diverted them from reaching their full potential, especially when it came to sexual agency. The book sold out on its first day of publication. It really cannot be overstated how influential it was. Greer's writing style and her charisma made her the poster child for second-wave feminism. It's really not an exaggeration to say it absolutely changed women's lives. All of a sudden, Greer had given them the language they needed to look beyond being wives and mothers and explore their full potential. Many women told Greer it was like a light bulb turning on for them. They went off to university, they pursued fulfilling work, they explored their sexual identities, they left unfulfilling marriages, they broke the chains of domestic servitude, and they didn't look back. Today, 55 years later, Greer's work is still highly relevant. However, some of her views on domestic violence and transgender people, for example, have gained criticism. Today she's 86 and lives in a care home in Castlemaine. She still gets out and about occasionally and gives interviews where she always has something interesting to say.